So I have the pre-war Gilbert Hudson number 2 torn apart, and I have all the pieces cleaned up and ready to go back together. But I wanted to show you this is the correct mechanism here on the tender. This is the DC pulse mechanical reverse unit for the AC field motor. Pretty amazing they packed all this in this tiny little tender shell. Well, it's actually huge for HO scale. What we have here, as far as I can tell, is there's 2 coils. This is the DC relay on this side, so that when a DC pulse is sent over the AC track, then it closes this. That contact then sends a pulse of AC to the second solenoid on this end, and that mechanically pulls the lever which actuates the pawl down here, and then that spins a drum which connects these contact fingers, and depending on the arrangement of the metal contacts that are on the drum, it will reverse the polarity of the motor. This is a 4-position reverse unit, which is the same style found in the larger S-scale locomotives. It is a different shape because they had to be able to fit it in the HO scale tender. Very interesting design, actually, and I don't know that I will be able to use this on DC power, but I do have AC transformers that I could hook up to my HO layout. The other thing that I wanted to address, a couple things actually, on the other motor that I put together, the commutator for the motor was very worn down, and you could actually see a dip in it where it was worn through. This motor seems to have very little time on it, and I suspect that it is because the other locomotive that I finished was modified to operate on DC. This one probably saw very little use, and this probably sat a lot on the shelf. Not to mention that Gilbert has a proprietary coupling system on these. So the other thing that I did, the wires tend to, so this is just a cardstock former for the field coil or end piece, and either by soldering or wear over time, the little holes that keep the fine coil wire in place are all broken off, and this wire on this side broke off. The one that is on the close side here wasn't broke off, but it was loose, and there were several wraps of coil wire coming undone. So I just decided to take this rather cheap vinyl electrical tape. Seems like it will do the trick of holding this coil wire in place. I did this on the first repaired motor, and it seems to work just fine. I don't have any trouble with that. Well, the last thing to address is, do you need to replace the wiring on this? This is really vintage cloth wiring, and a lot of people might not be comfortable operating it, but I actually don't mind using it. Well, how do you identify what's what and what goes where? Well, they actually mark the wires. There's 2 different kinds of wire on this, so the 2 wires that go to the field are marked with dots in the cloth. One is marked with red dots, and they faded to orange, and the other wire is green dots. So the 2 wires with the colored dots go to the field coil, and in reality these shouldn't matter which polarity they are because it runs on AC. So the reverse unit changes the direction of it, and the reverser controls the direction of the motor, not the polarity of the field wires. And then the other 2 wires are not marked which is which, but it's easy to identify as long as they aren't broken off which is which, because the way the motor is oriented, the short wire goes to this side, the long wire goes to the other side. As long as you don't have the tender side disconnected and work on one half at a time, it should be pretty easy to reuse the original wires. This one also has a 5th wire they used to connect the headlight in the boiler. Alright, the next things to do are to hook up and reassemble the motor. Then I will put the gear towers together. Also, these motors have a lot of spacers in them. These long screws I discovered from the other motor that I worked on. This one should go a lot faster because I'm done one already and familiar. They also took the time to paint some of the screw heads. So the painted one goes on the bottom on the other side, whereas it exposed in the top. The silver one goes on the top. So you also have to remember to put the spacers in correctly. So I'm actually going to put the spacers that go in between the frame and the field coil. So that means put one there. And they fit tightly over the screws so they don't fall off, which is nice. And next, the armature. In my last video on this, I called this a rotor, and the field coil I called a stator, and I believe that is true on certain types of motors. This one also has a fiber washer that goes on this end of the rotor. There we go. Now I can tighten down the screws. Now this also has a couple of fiber washers that go over the mounting studs. On this motor, it uses red ones. On the other one, it was black. So a couple interesting things about these pre-war motor brushes is that they are huge and they are very soft. I imagine if I squeeze them too hard they would shatter, so I do want to be very careful with these very old carbon brushes. This one's actually got a touch of corrosion. I think I'll put the corroded side on the outside. And probably what I'll have to do is shut the camera off to get these springs installed. But basically, you have to compress the spring and then slide the wire through, and then a wire through the little hole here. See if I can get this one. So I got it in, but I did not get the spring fully seated. Okay, I'm back. So here's what I did. The wire that broke off on the field coil side needed to be extended just a little bit for two reasons. One is that the wire was too short, and two, when I stripped the cloth insulation back, it was a little bit too corroded to solder to. So what I ended up having to do is the cloth insulation actually it's stretchy, so if you push it back it'll reveal more wire. So then I took this piece of new wire and then wrapped it around the old wire underneath the insulation, but this is spread back a little bit, and then soldered it together and bent it back over. I then added a piece of heat shrink to keep the cloth insulation from moving, and then I was able to solder the new piece of wire onto the field coil wire. The next thing I'm going to do with that is add one more piece of heat shrink. And then I'm also going to add, because these mounts are broken off, I'm going to add a drop of hot glue to each side to keep it in place. But first, I'm going to eat dinner.